A girl sits by a fire, turning a bone needle between her fingers. She is not thinking about history. She is not thinking about evolution. She is thinking about the cold and the thread and the tear in a hide that needs closing before morning. She does not know she is being watched by us, thousands of generations later, trying to understand what her life meant. And one of the first things we want to know about her is the strangest question we could ask. How old was she when her life as an adult began? Most people assume the answer is simple, that ancient humans grew up fast, married young, and had children almost as soon as their bodies allowed it. A short, brutal life compressed into a narrow window before disease or violence closed it. That assumption is not wrong, but it is not the whole truth either, and the parts it leaves out are far stranger than the parts it gets right. Here is the number people repeat most often. Life expectancy in the ancient world was around 30. It sounds definitive. It sounds like a fact carved in stone. It is also, in a critical sense, misleading. Life expectancy is an average, and averages collapse the moment you introduce something as brutal as infant mortality. When researchers reconstruct mortality curves from hunter-gatherer skeletal populations, a different picture appears. If a person survived childhood, if they made it past the years when disease and accident culled the population mercilessly, their remaining life expectancy climbed sharply. Many lived into their 60s. Some lived well beyond. The short life of prehistory was not a short life for everyone. It was a brutal filter at the beginning and a surprisingly long road afterward for those who passed through it, which means the real question is not how long did they live. It is when inside that life did they choose or were forced to begin the next generation. And the answer to that question was written into their bones before it was written into any myth. Every mammal carries a biological schedule. It is not philosophy. It is chemistry, timed by hormones, calibrated by evolution across millions of years. In modern industrialized populations, the average age of first menstruation sits around 12 or 13. It feels like a fixed law of nature. It is not. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer and forager societies, populations whose lifestyles echo, imperfectly but usefully, the conditions of deep prehistory, have recorded a very different number. Among groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or historical foraging populations studied by demographers, average menarche has been documented closer to 16, sometimes later. The difference is not genetic. It is caloric. Puberty, in evolutionary terms, is not a birthday. It is a permission slip issued by the body once it senses enough stored energy to survive a pregnancy and support an infant afterward. In a world of unpredictable food, of lean seasons and failed hunts, that permission slip was delayed year after year until the body was certain it could gamble. This means something unsettling. The industrialized world, with its surplus calories, its refined sugar, its constant abundance, may have pushed puberty earlier than it ever occurred for most of human evolutionary history. We assume our biology is ancient. In this case, it may be historically unusual. Here is where the story splits into two separate timelines, and confusing them is the single biggest mistake people make. There is the age the body becomes capable, and there is the age a person actually became a parent. These are not the same number. They were never meant to be. In most reconstructed foraging societies, first birth for women clustered later than biological capability, often in the late teens to early 20s. Not because of morality, not because of law, but because of arithmetic. A hunter-gatherer mother could not simply have a child whenever her body allowed. She had to carry it, often walking 10 to 15 kilometers a day, gathering food, sometimes already caring for a nursing toddler on her hip. Breastfeeding in these societies frequently continued for 3 to 4 years, both for nutrition and, researchers believe, as a natural, unconscious form of birth, spacing through lactational suppression of ovulation. The math was unforgiving. A mother nursing one child for 4 years in a mobile, foraging life could not easily support a second child arriving too soon. The interval between births in many documented forager populations averaged close to 4 years. This was not restraint. This was survival architecture, built into female physiology by millions of years of mothers who tried it the other way and lost. If the female side of this story is about biology colliding with caloric reality, the male side is about something else entirely: status. Across foraging societies studied by anthropologists, men typically began reproducing later than women, often in their mid to late 20s. Not because their bodies matured slower, because reproduction, for a man in these societies, was rarely just a biological event. It was a social one. A man needed, in many documented cultures, to demonstrate hunting competence, to build alliances, sometimes to accumulate resources or reputation, before a family would allow their daughter to be paired with him. Skill took years to prove. A boy who could throw a spear was not the same as a man trusted to keep a family alive through a bad winter, which means something quietly extraordinary was happening in prehistoric society. 10, 20, 40,000 years before written history, reproduction was not simply an act of biology, it was already being filtered through reputation, through trust, through the earliest form of something we still do today when we ask, before committing to someone, can I count on this person? The mechanism is ancient, only the paperwork has changed. But averages hide extremes, and extremes are where prehistory gets genuinely uncomfortable to look at directly. Skeletal and genetic evidence from agricultural societies, which arrived far more recently than the deep hunter-gatherer past, only around 10 to 12,000 years ago, tells a harsher story in places. Once humans settled into farming, something changed. Food became more stable in quantity but often worse in nutritional quality. Population density rose, and with it, in many agricultural and later historical populations, average ages at first marriage and first birth for women fell, sometimes into the mid-teens. Farming, in other words, may have done something evolution itself resisted. It removed the caloric breaks that once delayed reproduction, while simultaneously creating new social and economic pressures that pushed it earlier. Land needed heirs, labor needed hands. A daughter's marriage could stabilize an alliance between families or farms. The deep hunter-gatherer past, paradoxically, may have protected against early parenthood more consistently than the agricultural world that came after it. We tend to imagine history as a straight line of progress, and that things simply became safer, later, slower, more careful, the closer we got to now. The data does not support a straight line. It supports a curve that bends in directions we did not expect. Step back far enough, and this entire story stops being about age. It becomes about something larger, the evolutionary bet that made humans different from almost every other species on Earth. Human infants are born catastrophically helpless. A newborn wildebeest stands within minutes. A human infant cannot even hold up its own skull for months. Our brains are so large and human hips so structurally limited for walking upright that evolution made a trade. Give birth early, before the brain finishes growing, and finish the job outside the womb. This single trade-off reshaped everything about the timing of human reproduction. It meant childhood had to be long. It meant children needed protection for years, not weeks. It meant a mother alone, in the deep past, likely could not have reliably raised a human child to independence without help, which is why many anthropologists now argue that human reproduction was never truly a two-person event. It required what researchers call alloparenting, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, sometimes the wider group, all contributing care. The age at which someone became a parent then was never just a personal milestone. It was a signal that an entire support network was ready to absorb the cost of a life that would not be self-sufficient for over a decade. A single data point in age was really a proxy for something enormous, whether a community had the strength to carry a new life through its longest, most vulnerable years. There is one more figure hiding in this story, and she rarely gets mentioned. Human females are among the only mammals on Earth known to experience menopause decades before the end of a natural lifespan. Most other species remain fertile until death. Why would evolution do this? Why stop reproduction early in a species already reproducing later than expected? The leading explanation, known among researchers as the grandmother hypothesis, suggests something quietly radical. A woman past reproductive age was, in evolutionary terms, more valuable, alive, and helping than pregnant again. Her labor, gathering food, caring for grandchildren, freeing her daughter to have and support more children sooner, may have increased the survival odds of her entire lineage more than another pregnancy of her own ever could. If this is correct, it means one of the deepest architectures of human family life was never built solely around parents and children. It was built around 3 generations, working simultaneously, each absorbing a piece of the impossible cost of raising a human being. The age a person began a family, in this light, was never the beginning of the story. It was the moment they joined a machine that had already been running for generations before them, and would keep running for generations after. So, what age did ancient humans start families? The honest answer is unsatisfying in the way truth often is. It depended on the season's food, on a mother's fat reserves, on a young man's reputation with a spear, on whether a grandmother was still alive to help carry the weight of a newborn. No one could yet feed alone. There was no single age, there was only a negotiation, repeated in every generation, between a body ready to reproduce and a world that may or may not have been ready to let it. We like to imagine our ancestors as simpler than us, governed by instinct alone, immune to hesitation. But the evidence suggests something closer to the opposite. They were calculating, cautious, embedded in networks of trust and obligation, waiting, sometimes for years, for conditions that felt survivable. Perhaps that is the discomfort hidden inside this question. Not that ancient humans started families too young, but that the careful, anxious, endlessly negotiated act of deciding when to bring a life into an uncertain world is not a modern invention at all. It is one of the oldest decisions our species has ever made. We are not the first generation to hesitate, we are only the latest.